Hello, everybody. Greetings and welcome to the Ask Abhijit show. I hope you're all doing very well. Before we begin, let's see who all is there. Let's see. Let me greet everybody. Mohit, Justin, Aniket, Shrihari, Dungar Singh Chauhan, Amay, Alphaverse, Avinandan Sen, Hardik, Arya, Ashish, Mohit, Bot Gaming, Tanushri, Samarth, Akash, Amit Panchal, Kasta Jeevana, Bluebird, Shubham, Subhita, Vicky, Ujwal, Keshav, Om Naik, Jugal Shet, Amit, Arjun, Asmenor, Teach Intern, Gyandeep, Pushkar, Vatsal, Nikhil, Lavish, Sanathoibi, hello, Ankur Bhatt, Harshraj, Rahul, Aditya, Om, Shri Hari, and Chiching, Arya, Rakshita, and everybody else. Greetings. Great to see you all. And I hope you're all doing well, like I said. And let's get into the questions. I have picked a bunch of questions and let's see how many I can answer tonight. I suppose I should begin with the question that the people have asked the most. So let me get into that. So this is by Rajat Chopra. The question is, why are the Arab countries condemning Nupur Sharma's statement on whatever? This seems like a coordinated effort. What's your take on this issue? Okay, so I'm going to answer the geopolitical aspect of this. I'm not going to go into what the lady said, whether it's right, whether it's wrong. I'm not getting into that. I'm going to answer the geopolitical aspect. So the entire scenario, this entire situation started with the statements by Qatar, right? And most of the other Arabic, etc., countries followed suit. So let's understand what really is happening here. Let's talk about Qatar. Do we know where Qatar is? Let me show where Qatar is in case some of you may not know it. Let me go to the map and show and take a look at where Qatar is. So we know where India is, obviously. So let's go westwards to the Arabic Peninsula. And here we have this tiny nation of Qatar. All right, this is where Qatar is. The capital is Doha. And the entire fracas, so to say, started with the statement of Qatar. So let's take a look at the history and the background of Qatar just a bit to understand what's happening. So this nation, Qatar, used to be a British protectorate. It was a British protectorate until 1971, right? Then if you go further a couple of decades, it was one of the launch pads for the 1991 US invasion of Iraq. It was also a launchpad for the 2003 US invasion of Iraq. Qatar participated in the 2011 US operations in Libya, which deposed the dictator Muammar Gaddafi. Qatar is known to be funding anti-Assad, anti-Russia rebel groups in Syria. Now, why don't you take a look at which groups constitute the so-called rebels fighting against Putin and Assad in Syria? It's very interesting names will turn up over there, right? So Qatar is funding anti-Russia, anti-Assad rebel groups in Syria, right? Qatar is participating in the supposedly Saudi-led war in Yemen. Now we know who the Saudis work for. Who is the puppet master of the Saudis? We know who that is. I hope you all know who that is. That's what Qatar is doing. Qatar also facilitated Afghanistan's handover from the US to the Taliban. And most recently, Qatar has been designated by the US as a major non NATO ally. And we know that the TV channel Al Jazeera operates out of Qatar. So essentially, if you look at this entire sequence, this entire pattern, if you look at it, it becomes quite obvious that Qatar is a sock puppet of the United States. That's what Qatar is. And Qatar, I believe, was designated a major non NATO US ally right after or right around the Russian intervention in Ukraine. And we know what the attitude of the US and the West has been vis-a-vis the Indian stance on Ukraine. India has steadfastly refused to take sides in the Ukraine crisis. And India is looking out for its own national interest. And that has not gone down with the West, especially the US. The West is the US. And then all of this has started. So Qatar is the first nation in the Gulf region that issued whatever statements it issued against India, condemning whatever, right? And various other Gulf nations followed suit. All of these Gulf nations are essentially, in some way or the other, sock puppets of the superpower. And of course, some very bright and intelligent people will point out, hey, Abhijit, even the Taliban issued a statement, even Iran issued a statement. These are not puppets of the US. Well, there is something called FOMO, FOMO, fear of missing out. So that's what motivated countries like Iran and regimes like the Taliban to also follow suit, because we don't want to be left out when everyone is doing this, right? So the question you're asking is that, what you're saying is that this seems like to be a coordinated effort. Obviously, it's a coordinated effort. The United States is really upset with India for taking the stance it has taken in the Ukraine crisis. The US wants India to bend the knee and become a part of the well of the coalition of the willing, essentially become a vassal state of the US. India will not do that, and therefore the US is trying everything in the playbook to pressurize India and to hit back at India in a variety of ways. It will use all the tools at its disposal to do that. So what we are witnessing is a continuation of that. These Arabic countries, like I have mentioned multiple times, and I have demonstrated this, India has excellent relations with these Arabic countries, with whether it's the Saudis, whether it is Oman, whether it's the UAE or whatever else. India has excellent relations with them, and it's just because of external influence that these countries are doing what they're doing. So this is a passing phase. It doesn't mean that our relations have gone bad with these countries. It doesn't mean that we have capitulated in front of their superior firepower or whatever. What we are seeing is a manifestation of a bigger power at play, and that power is way more powerful than India is as of today. And therefore it is prudent to play the long game. Let them get some small wins now, doesn't matter. What matters is the long term prosperity of the nation and the long term national security and national interest. That's what matters. So I know lots of people have expressed all kinds of outrage on social media that India has bent the knee, this government is so weak, blah, 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 blah. That is not the case. This government is playing a long game. Now, you may see it whichever way you want. This is how I see it. So, this is what I have to say about this issue. Right. Next, the question. This is by Bruh. Bruh. The question is, could you give a brief on Machiavelli's dualistic strategy of a fortuna and a virtu? Could you give examples of events from this century? Okay. Fortuna and virtu is not a dualistic strategy. These are two concepts that Niccolo Machiavelli, uh, wrote about in his works. His most famous work, obviously, is The Prince. Right, The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. That's what makes him so famous. So, in his works, in his writings, he wrote about these two concepts, fortuna and virtu. All right, what are these two things? So, fortuna is the things you can't control. See, Machiavelli wrote about power. He wrote about what a ruler should do in order to rule properly, to hang on to power, to stay in power, and to maximize his power, and to rule effectively, and so on. Right. So, according to Machiavelli, there are two main forces in uh, there are two main forces at work when it comes to rule, when it comes to power, when it comes to ruling a nation or a people or kingdom or whatever, or an empire, right? The first force at work is fortuna, which is those things that you can't control. Fortune, chance. Let's say you are the king of a city which is sitting on the banks of a river, right? It's a major river, and suddenly there's a huge massive flash flood that comes. The river goes into a massive flood, and what's going to happen? It's going to destroy the city. This is something the king cannot control. That is fortuna. What is virtu? Virtue is not being good. It means the ability to stay in power, the ability to rule effectively and well. That is virtu. So let's say you are a king of a city that is sitting on the banks of a river. The river once in 50 years undergoes a big spate of flooding. The king knows this. He knows that this is something he cannot control, but he can build dams, he can build embankments, and he can do whatever it takes in order to minimize the effect, the deleterious effects of the flooding. So that is what the king can do. He cannot control when the flood will happen. He cannot control the magnitude of the flood, but he can control his actions in mitigating of a possible future flood. So that is virtu, right? So the ability, the Chinese call it the mandate of heaven. If you are in power, and if you are able to rule effectively, then you have the mandate of heaven. Then the gods are smiling on you. Things are there which you can't control, but whatever you can control, you do it the best. Do you do it to the best of your ability? That is virtue. That is the virtue of a ruler. It doesn't mean the ruler has to be virtuous and noble and kind and benevolent and all that. It means that the ruler should know how to rule and how to stay in power and how to uh, rule effectively, and hopefully do something good for the country. That may also be part of virtue, but it's all the ability to rule well. That is virtue. So fortuna is what you can't control. Virtue is what you can do in to the maximum amount of your ability. These are the two things. These are the two forces that are in balance when it comes to ruling. Right. So that's what Machiavelli wrote about, the dualistic strategy of fortuna and virtu. Things you can't control and things you can control, and the interplay of these two forces. So that's what it is. Events from the century, events every day are a combination of fortuna and virtu. So it is something that does apply in the real world. I mean, you can think. I mean, look at the current events in Afghanistan. There are certain things. Most of it. So let's ask ourselves this question. The Americans recently, last year in August, around August, they withdrew from Afghanistan. How much of this was fortuna and how much was virtu? How much of this was unforeseen circumstances that forced them to withdraw? And how much of this was their own decision to withdraw? I think it was all their own decision to withdraw. I think they got tired of it, right? They decided that the time was opportune for them to leave Afghanistan, and they handed over the country to the Taliban, using Oman as an intermediary in the process, right? So that sort of thing. So these are the two main forces at play in the career of any ruler, of any regime, of any government. Things they can do and things they can't control. And the best rulers have a great amount of virtu, and they rule well and effectively. So those are the most powerful and most impactful rulers and regimes. So that's a little bit about fortuna and virtu. Next question is by Asmita. It is said that the Portuguese discovered the sea route to India in 1498. Yes, 1492 was Columbus reaching America, and 1498 was Vasco da Gama going around the Cape of Good Hope and reaching Calicut, India. So they discovered the sea route to India in 1498. There's a gap of more than a century thereafter for the British to reach India, as they first came to India in 1608. What do Whether the reasons for such a long gap are known? All right, good question. So the Portuguese first came to India in 1498, and the British came more than a century later. Why this big gap? So to understand why it took the British so long to get their act together, you have to look at British history. So if you look at the history of England around this time, late 1400s to the 1600s, you will see that there's a lot of turmoil, political turmoil, instability. You had the Plantagenet dynasty, which was in power in the 1400s. Edward the Fourth from 1460s to 1480s. Yeah, that was Edward the Fourth. Then you had Edward the Fifth, who was there for a few just 1 year, less than 1 year. Then you had his uncle Richard III, who came to power in 1483, and he was in power for 2.5 years. Then there was this great battle, the Battle of Bosworth Field, in which Richard the Third was killed, and the Tudor dynasty began. Henry VII, right? So, and Richard III is a very celebrated king. He was supposed to be very evil and all that, and they recently discovered his skeleton under a car park just 2 3 years ago, right? A very interesting case. So, in 1485, I believe, Henry V came to power, the first ruler of the Tudor dynasty. He ruled for quite a while until the 1500s, 1509, 1510. Then Henry VIII came to power. Now, Henry VIII is this great king, he ruled for like almost nearly 40 years. His rule was quite tumultuous. He was very ambitious. He saw himself as a world conqueror or whatever, at least conqueror of Europe, but he never really did anything. He had many, many wives. He killed many of them. He had them beheaded and all, crazy guy, but very interesting ruler. So there was this entire period of instability. So this begins, the Edward the Fourth was the 1460s. Henry the Eighth was until the 1540s, 1547, I think he died. Then there was more instability. His daughter, Henry the Eighth's daughter, came to power, Mary the First, also known as Bloody Mary, who tried to undo everything her father had done. She reintroduced Catholicism as the main de facto religion of the country. She tried to undo everything her father did. So she was in power for about 5 years. More instability because of that. Then after her half sister Elizabeth the First came to power in 1558, I think, and she ruled for nearly half a century. So it is when Elizabeth came to power that things stabilized, and her age was known as the Elizabethan age, the golden one of the golden ages, maybe the golden age of England. And she reintroduced her father's policies, Protestantism and the Anglican Church and all that. And she was quite liberal. She was quite fond of the sciences and progress and all those things. So it is under her rule that England became a scientific superpower and a technological superpower. There were some these conflicts with the Spanish, in which the English Navy was able to defeat the Spanish Armada and all that. And it's only in the around the end of the 16th century that things were quite stable, that England was stable and prosperous. And I think it is in 1599 that the East India Company was formed, and the first ship of this company reached India, I think, in 1608, Surat in Western India. And the first factory was established in Surat in 1613. And a couple of years later, there was the second factory established in southern India in Machilipatnam, and so on and so forth. So there's a gap of a century between the Portuguese supposedly rediscovering India and the British making contact with India, because of this entire period of instability, political instability, infighting, and all that in England. So that is the reason why there's such a long gap. Hope that makes sense, and good question. Right. Prashant says, can India fulfill all its oil requirements from Russia in order to reduce dependency on the Gulf countries? If yes, then why isn't the government doing so? Why do we trade with countries that have agendas against us? Okay. I'm sure that the Russians can supply all the oil that India needs. So India can cut off all its ties with the Gulf and get everything from Russia. But then will it not create a dependency on Russia itself? Think about that. See, in geopolitics, in business, in trade, in investing, in whatever, in life, you cannot be dependent on only one source of whatever, of energy, of money, or of income, or whatever. You need to have a balanced portfolio. Let's say you're an investor. Let's say you have 1 crore rupees to invest. Let's say you have $1 million to invest, that you wish to invest somewhere. Will you invest all of that into just the stock of one company? What if that company crashes? You're going to lose all your money. You need to have a balanced portfolio. You need to look at the different companies that are out there, and invest in the best performing companies, the companies that have been performing well for a long time. Those are good bets. And you can have some part of your some percentage of investment in more speculative ventures, maybe cryptocurrency, maybe NFTs, maybe some new upcoming startups or whatever. So you need to have balanced portfolio. You cannot put all of your eggs in one basket. You cannot put all of your money on one horse. Similarly, when it comes to energy supply, when it comes to oil, when it comes to the, yeah, oil, we need to make sure that we have multiple sources that we rely on. If we put all of our bets on Russia and something goes wrong there, we don't want anything to go wrong there. But what if something goes wrong? Then what will we do? If we burn our bridges with the other countries, what do we do? We're going to be in trouble. That's why we need to have a balanced portfolio. We need to get some oil from the Gulf, from the Saudis, from Oman, from Kuwait, from Iran. Get some oil from Venezuela. Get some oil from Nigeria. Get some oil from Russia. Get it from multiple sources. Keep your basket balanced. That's what we need to do. Maybe some of these countries have agendas against us. So what? We are giving them good money for something that is useful to us. We can trade with our enemies. We trade with China. Come on. The Chinese are not India's friends. We know what they seek. We know what they seek, but we trade with them. As long as it benefits us, we can engage in such activities, right? So that is why we are not cutting off our sources, uh, our trade with the Gulf companies. We need their oil, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship. We have cultivated a very good relationship with various Gulf countries, with the Saudis, with the Omanis, with the Kuwaitis, and so on and so forth, with the Parsi, I mean, the Iranians, Persians. And we're going to continue that. It is in our national interest to do that. And that's what will continue. So that's the reason. And we are certainly importing oil from the Russians. Why not? They are offering us oil at good prices, at discounted rates. We will certainly take advantage of that, and we have increased the amount of oil that we are purchasing from the Russians. It's all about your national interest. It's all about mutual interests, mutual benefits. So that's how we play the game. That's how the game is played in geopolitics. Next question. What? Okay, Earthian. That's wrong. What's wrong? After Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the economy of India was still growing. It even reached 8.7% per annum. After 2012, it started to go down, slow down. In 2019, it was down to 5%. It went to minus 23% during COVID. Now it's rising again. So this gentleman or lady, whoever it is saying that. So I had made a statement somewhere that after 2004, the economy kind of tanked, right? So maybe that was not a very accurate statement, but what I said is that during the UPA era, 10 years, the economy, the economic policies were not good enough, and the economy tanked. So this gentleman is pointing out pedantically, so that for some time it was doing well. It reached 8.7% per annum, and only after 2012 it started to go down. So let's understand how things are in life, whether it is in a sport, whether it is in a business, whether it is in entrepreneurship, whether it is in running a country, whether it is in the economy. There is always a characteristic delay between cause and effect, right? Let's say you have a website, and you have been doing SEO, search engine optimization, but you're not getting the kind of results you want. You're only getting 10,000 visitors per month. Then you bring in a new person for SEO, and they change the strategy, they tweak things up. So are you going to see results overnight? No. After they implement the new policy, it will take a certain amount of time before the results become visible. There is a characteristic inherent delay between cause and effect. Let's say you are the manager of a football club. Your club is doing terribly. So the manager is sacked, a new manager is brought in. This new manager implements a lot of changes. He sacks a lot of non-performing players. He brings in a bunch of uncapped young players with a lot of potential. He changes the tactics, strategies, everything. You think you will see results overnight? You may have another bad season, but if you keep on doing this, maybe next season you will see the results. There is always a gap between cause and effect, a characteristic time delay. When it comes to the economy, Mr. Vajpayee, during his time, he implemented lots of reforms in the economy. In a nation of 1.3 billion people, when you implement reforms, there's going to be a significant amount of time before you see results. So, whatever work was done during the Vajpayee government until 2004, what happened after 2004 is that the Vajpayee government lost the election. A new government came in and they started reaping the benefits of the reforms the Vajpayee government had done. And the economy started rising, it started doing well. It's only after 2012 that the new changes that the new government had made became apparent. I mean, their effect became apparent, and that's how the economy started going down. In 2014, Mr. Modi's government came to power. They started on a program of reforms, and for the longest time, nothing was visible. The economy was not doing well. Only now are we seeing the results of all the reforms that were done since 2014. Now the economy is rising. It's rising, it's rising, it's rising, and it's going to keep rising. Of course, there is volatility globally. That also has an effect. But overall, the graph is rising now. There is a significant delay between cause and effect when you're running a massive, gigantic country of 1.3 billion people. When it comes to the reforms that you implement and the time for it, for those results to be visible in the real world, for the effect on the economy to be visible. So please understand this. Whether it is a sport, whether it is business, whether it's running an economy, there is always a characteristic delay between cause and effect. And the best players understand that delay very well. So if you're a business person, if you're a sports person, and if you understand how much time it's going to take for something to become apparent, then you're going to do very well. And if you have no idea of how it works, you will give up before you will see results. That's how it is. Okay, this is a tremendously long question. Alay Patel says Abhijit is right. Mao was very clear in his mind. He did not know how, but he definitely knew what. His opponent, the founder of Taiwan, Chiang Kai shek, was also very clear headed. On the other side, all Indian leaders of the subcontinent, Gandhi, Nehru, Jinnah, never had any clarity of what they wanted to do. This lack of clarity is a signature quality of an Indian mind. Wow, that's okay. The lack of clarity is a signature quality of an Indian mind. The Indian mind can never be clear going as far as Chandragupta or Ashok. We see this problem. Those two guys also royally destroyed their own empire created by Chanakya. In a way, clarity of mind is not an accident, it's a very rare phenomenon among all races. As of now, only the Western and Far Eastern countries show clarity of mind. The only hope for us is to learn from the Gita and other Indian texts and get some clarity of mind. Chances are very slim. If it had to happen, it would have happened. We are staring at an iron home wall. We should give up and we are doomed. Okay, so what Alai is saying is that the lack of clarity is a signature. The lack of clarity is a signature quality of the Indian mind. And ever since the time of Chandragupta and Ashok, we are seeing this pattern. Chandragupta apparently destroyed his own empire. I'm sorry. Did Chandragupta destroy his empire? He forged an empire out of nothing. And Ashok expanded that empire. So that's not quite consistent with reality, but okay. And after that time, there has been no clarity of mind in any Indian ruler or whatever. So, what was the Kushan Empire, which stretched all the way to the Caspian and the Aral Seas? Some will say, "Oh, Kanishka was not Indian." Okay, even if that is absolutely not true, but even if that is the case, what about the Gupta Empire, which again conquered all the way to Balkh, and beyond, most likely, and the whole of the Indian subcontinent. Uh, Samudragupta, for instance, did he not possess clarity of mind? Samudragupta, if you look at his career, his entire career from start to finish was an extended military campaign. No clarity of mind. I think he had singular clarity of mind. The same goes for Kumaragupta. The same goes for Skandagupta and so on. What about Lalitaditya Muktapida, the great Kashmiri conqueror, the great Kashmiri king? He conquered most of India. He also conquered Central Asia. Did he not have clarity of mind, my dear friends? What about the great Chola emperors, Rajaraja Chola and Rajendra Chola? Rajendra Chola conquered the entirety of Southeast Asia. Was there no clarity of mind there? He conquered all the way to the Philippines. You still find inscriptions in Sanskrit in the Philippines. Was there no clarity of mind? What about the great Marathas? What about the great Shivaji, the great Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj? Did he not have clarity of mind? Please, let us see. It's like this: all general statements are false. Do you see the inherent contradiction in what I just said? I said all general statements are false, and that itself is a general statement. So I totally disagree with the assessment here that the lack of clarity is a signature quality of an Indian mind. That is not the case. And this sort of perception or this sort of this belief is the consequence of the last 1000 years of humiliation. India has gone through, it is still undergoing, it is still passing through the millennium of humiliation, in which you had defeat after defeat. You had a lot of resistance, you had victories as well. You had the Maratha Empire, which defeated the invaders and so on. But again, we fell prey to the next invader, the Europeans, the British, and so on. So we have gone through a millennium of humiliation. And because of that, and especially because of the education system, which teaches us that we are all losers, that's why people get this sense or this feeling or this belief that Indians are losers, our people are not great. The signature quality of an Indian mind is a lack of clarity and so on. That's not the case. Even today, we have certain leaders who have a singular clarity of mind and purpose. And like I said some time ago, there's always a certain delay between cause and effect. So be patient, my friends. Whoa, this is a big thing. Let's take a look. This is by Ahmad. Muhammad Ahmad. Greetings from Pakistan. You defeated us 4 times since independence. Every time you guys declared a ceasefire without capturing any territory of ours. You might even defeat us fifth and even sixth time. You guys might defeat us 100 times. You guys are not undefeatable. We can afford to lose 100 battles. We will certainly be attacking you 101st time as well. You cannot afford to lose a single battle. You have to win every battle. But we want just one victory to capture your territory and obviously to genocide you. I am a teacher in Rawalpindi. I teach this predator philosophy to my students. Have a good day. So, this is what Mr. Muhammad Ahmad has to say. He teaches this predator philosophy to his students. So, I would like to say to Mr. Ahmad, thank you so much for sharing this with us. You thank you for your honesty. So, this is what India is up against. India, we can say all we want about us being the same people. हमारा DNA एक ही है. We have the same DNA, all of us. Yeah, it's true. It's true. Indians and Pakistanis have the same DNA. Indians and the Pashtuns have the same DNA. We are the same people. We have the same ancestors. And yet, this is the attitude in Pakistan. This is what they teach them. And it's true that we have fought 4 wars since 1947. Each of those wars was initiated by Pakistan. India responded. India did not fire the first shots ever. India defeated Pakistan every single time, right? And it was India that declared a ceasefire every time without capturing any significant territory. Yes, India liberated Bangladesh in 1971, but India did not reincorporate Bangladesh into India. India allowed Bangladesh to become a separate nation. So once again, India did not capture any territory. And whatever little territory was captured here and there was given away by the politicians after the ceasefire. And like Mr. Ahmad is saying, we can defeat them 100 times, but we never going to do to them what they want to do to us. So all it will take for them is to defeat India once. So that is something. This is a rare moment of honesty. So I would like to really thank Mr. Ahmed for sharing this with us. And this is what they are made to teach. And maybe they agree with it. This is what their students are taught over there in Pakistan. So understand this, my friends, and I'm sure the Indian government knows this. This is a different kind of government. It's not like the previous regimes. We know that Pakistan is a threat that's not going to go away unless we deal with it in the appropriate manner. So yeah, that's what it is. So there's no question here. It's just a statement. It's something that he wanted to share with us. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And you are right. That is indeed the case. Okay, Vishal Mahajan says, will Ireland unite following the left wing Sinn Féin's victory in the recent elections in Northern Ireland? Will this increase the demand for Scottish and Welsh nationalism as well? Interesting question. So, what's happened is that the Sinn Féin has become the largest party in the Northern Ireland Assembly, right? So, what does that mean? So, what is the story? So, Sinn Féin is the party that was fighting for Northern Ireland's independence from the British, from Britain. See, Northern Ireland is under British occupation. It is actually British occupied Ireland. It's not Northern Ireland. It is British occupied Ireland. Let's take a look at the map. Yeah, the map always helps when we deal with these things. So here we are, and if you look at the map here, this here is the island of Ireland, and it is politically cut into two portions. The largest portion is main Ireland or just Ireland, and in the north you have Northern Ireland. So Northern Ireland is under British military occupation. The people of Ireland wish to be free from Britain. Okay, so it is under illegal or so to say illegitimate British military occupation, and the history is bloody. The British have violated all kinds of human rights in Northern Ireland. They have acted like a terrorist force, and that is what it is. So there was this resistance going on in Northern Ireland for decades. The Sinn Féin was involved in it. The IRA, Irish Republican Army, which has at least two factions, was involved in that, and so on, right? And this went on for decades. So there was this entire never-ending cycle of violence that went on. The violence spilled over into England as well, right? There were bombings by the IRA in England. The Prime Minister of Britain, Margaret Thatcher, once narrowly escaped with her life when her hotel room was bombed with a mortar or something, and she narrowly escaped with her life because she was in a different room at the time. So this is something that went on for decades, right? Now, so then what happened? So somehow magically all these troubles, they went away in 1998, somehow magically. It's very strange. So it's like this: in 1997, Tony Blair became the president of Great Britain, so-called Great Britain, right? Now, Tony Blair, he has been accused, rightly or wrongly, of being a US lapdog. Okay, he was a US lapdog. That's what people say, and there may be some justification to that allegation. So the moment this guy Tony Blair comes to power in England, the troubles in Ireland end magically. Yeah, and the Northern Ireland Assembly was established 1 year later in 1998, and then there were elections in Northern Ireland, and it became a functioning democracy, and all was well. And the Sinn Féin renounced violence and blah 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 blah. As soon as a US puppet comes to power in Britain, and before Tony Blair came to power, the UK was not quite so amenable to US demands about its foreign policy, and that's why, and somehow coincidentally, there was a lot of trouble in Ireland for decades. But as soon as a proper lapdog comes to power, all the troubles end. I'm just pointing out this strange coincidence. I'm not asking you to put two and two together. Okay, so the Sinn Fein renounced violence. The troubles ended after Tony Blair came to power. Just magic happened overnight, right? And the assembly was established in 1998. And this year, I think it was in May that the latest election was held, so-called election. So in the May 2022 election in the Northern Ireland Assembly, the Sinn Fein became the largest political party. They got the most seats. They are the party with the most seats. Now they do not. So this is the thing is this: the Northern Ireland Assembly doesn't really have any real power. Northern Ireland is still under British military occupation. The Northern Ireland Assembly, Parliament, whatever you want to call it, is it's something like the elections the British used to hold in India before 1947, the so-called provincial elections and all that. That was just a joke, a sham. It was not democracy. When you are under foreign occupation and that foreign occupation power holds election in your country, those elections are illegitimate. They are null and void. That is not democracy. In a real democracy, your country needs to be free from foreign interference, and your own institutions, like your own election commission, without any external interference, should hold elections. That is real democracy, and that's a legitimate election. So the Northern Ireland Assembly elections are illegitimate, undemocratic. They are a sham designed to fool the world into thinking that everything is well in Ireland. Right? So the Sinn Féin's victory means nothing. The Sinn Féin, for whatever reason, in 1997, 98, they suddenly magically decided to renounce violence and to renounce the demand for independence, so to say. So their coming to power means nothing. Means absolutely nothing. Right? It will not increase any demand for Scottish or Welsh nationalism, nothing of the sort. The entire UK, it doesn't have an independent foreign policy or independent internal policy. It is one of the small elements of the overall US empire. It is a vassal state. It does whatever it's told. And of course, you have elections, and also it all looks like things are well, and there is democracy and all. Democracy actually is one of the biggest shams or scams that has been pulled upon the world. In very few places do you have genuine democracy, yeah, without any foreign interference. So to conclude, this so-called election in Northern Ireland and the so-called victory of the Sinn Féin means absolutely nothing. It's going to do nothing. Ireland will remain under British occupation, and Britain essentially is under US occupation, whether you realize it or not. So that's just how it is. This is the Anglosphere, which is all uh, more or less controlled from one location in North America, Washington DC. That's what it is. Okay, Samiksha Goyal says in Rock Edict 13, Ashoka himself said that he has converted to Buddhism. How can you say that there is no evidence, Abhijit? You're wrong. Okay, Samiksha says that. So let's see what is the truth. Did Ashoka himself said that he had converted to Buddhism? Let us take a look at what the Rock Edict 13 has to say about this. Let me share my screen. Inscriptions of Ashoka. Here we are. So this is the translation of the inscriptions of Ashoka. This is the 12th Rock Edict. We need to go to the 13th one. Where is the 13th Rock Edict? Okay, this is the Sanskrit, or rather Devanagari transcription, Devanagari version of what is written there. I think it was written in Pali, which is an Apabhransha language of Sanskrit, a descendant language of Sanskrit. So let's go. This is what the inscription looks like. This is the transliteration of all of that into the Latin script, which you think is the English script. And here is the translation. Okay, let's take a look at what it says. It begins, when King Devanama Priya Priyadarshi had been anointed 8 years, The country of the Kalingas was conquered by him. 150,000 in number were the men who were deported, thence 100,000 in number were those who were slain there, and many times as many those who died. After that, now that Kalinga has been taken, the king is devoted to a zealous study of morality, to the love of morality, and to the instruction of people in morality. Okay, great. This is the repentance of Devanama Priya on account of his conquest of the country of the Kalingas. For this is considered very painful and deplorable by Devanama Priya that while one is conquering an unconquered country, slaughter, death, and deportation of people are taking place there. But the following is considered even more deplorable than this by the king, and so on and so forth. Obedience to blah 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 blah. Lots of stuff. Very nice PR on behalf of Ashok. If there is misfortune to friends, acquaintances, companions, blah blah blah, this is shared by all men. It is men is considered deplorable by Devanam Priya. There is no country where these two classes, the Brahmins and the Shramanas, do not exist except among the Yonas or the Yavanas or the Greeks. And there is no place in any country where men are not indeed attached to some sect or some class or whatever. Therefore, even the 100th part or the 1000th part of those people who were slain, who died, and who were deported at the time of when the country was taken would be considered very deplorable by the king. Okay, he's a great man full of morality, desires towards being self-control, impartiality, kindness. And this conquest has been won repeatedly by Devanam Priya here among all his borders, even as far as the distance of 600 yojanas, where the Yona king named Antioga or Antiochus is ruling. And beyond this Antiochus, there are four kings who are ruling. There is the king named Tulamaya. Tulamaya is Ptolemy of Egypt, yes. Uh, named Antekina, named Maka, named Alexander, and so on from the south. The Cholas and the Pandyas are ruling as far as Tamraparni or Sri Lanka. Likewise, in the king's territory, among the Yonas and the Kambojas, Nabakas, Bhojas, etc., 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 people are conforming to Devanama Priya's instruction in morality. How strong a king he was! So righteous, so moral that everybody is conforming to his morality. Even those to whom envoys do not go, having heard of the duties of morality, and so on and so forth, are conforming. Very good, conforming. Good. This conquest has been won by this everywhere, causes the feeling of satisfaction. Good. Firm becomes the satisfaction, and blah blah blah. This satisfaction is of no consequence. The king thinks only the fruits of the other world are of great value, and so on and so on and so on and so on and so forth. And that is where the edict ends. Where does it say he has conquered to he has converted to Buddhism? Please tell me, where does it say that the great king Ashok has converted to Buddhism? I just showed you the entire rock edict, the entire text. Look it up yourself. It's available in the public domain. I have not dragged it out of some secret location. This is something you can Google and find for yourself. Do some homework and do some research of your own. So please tell me, where does it say that the great king Ashok converted to Buddhism? Nowhere in Rock Edict 13 or any other rock edict does it say that the king Ashok converted to Buddhism. Please check your facts, right? There you are. Next question. Global Affairs says, this is a very large question. One request to all of the viewers: if you would like me to answer something, it is best if you keep your questions short, one or two sentences. I see some people ask very interesting questions, but they write a whole wall of text. So that's not going to work. Please keep your questions short. Anyhow, let's take this. The Kalinga Empire has been a glorious empire in itself. Okay. Apart from being one of the pioneers in maritime business, they made India's oldest systematic dance form, Odissi. The Lord Jagannath Temple was one of the first, etc., 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 etc. Can you please explain about the policies of the Kalinga Empire and the objectives of the rulers? And how did the ancient Roman historian Pliny mention this region of India as Oritis in his book called Natural History in 77 AD? He says this region as where and when there be no shadows. Okay, Kalinga. Look, Kalinga is one of the major forces, major engines that drove ancient India. Kalinga obviously is now what we call Orissa. It's on the eastern coast of India. In case some of you don't know where Orissa is, I hope there's nobody like that, but let me just share my screen and show where Odisha is. Let's get out of the British Islands, come back to India. And here on the eastern coast of India, you have Kalinga, which is now called Odisha. And the northern part of Odisha is called Utkal, which is Uttara Kalinga. So you have Bhubaneswar, you have Puri, you have the city of Katak, if I can find it somewhere. Yeah, here it is, Katak, and then so on and so forth. Wonderful place, wonderful people, beautiful culture, great history, and so on and so forth, right? That is Kalinga. So Kalinga was one of the great engines, cultural, economic, military, maritime, etc., engines that drove ancient India. Kalinga is the region or the empire that spread Indian culture eastwards for the first time, as far as we know. So this dates back to at least 2.5 or 3,000 years before today. So Kalinga, the people of Kalinga used to trade with Southeast Asia, with neighboring kingdoms across the Bay of Bengal, like Burma, Thailand, Indonesia, Southeast Asia, Funan, in Cambodia, in Vietnam, and so on and so forth, right? So they are the people of Kalinga are the ones who first inculturated Southeast Asia with Indian culture, exposed Southeast Asia to Indian culture, right? And even today in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia especially, I believe that Indian people are still called Kalings, right? So that tells you how old this connection is. So Kalinga definitely has a great history, great rich culture, beautiful geography, great people, all of that. So that's what I can tell you about Kalinga. And yeah, I don't know what Pliny wrote about Kalinga. He called it Oritis. We don't know what Oritis is. Maybe Orissa, maybe not. We don't know about that. But great history. It is certainly something that people should study about, read about, because it's an integral part of the greatness of ancient India. Right. Nanda Gopan says, why are almost all international cricket grounds in Australia located in the coastal region, even though it's a very large country or continent? Very good question. Let's take a look at. Okay, so it's like this. There is something called the Pareto principle, the 80-20 principle. So that kind of applies to Australia. So, so all of the cricket grounds in Australia, where is Australia? Okay, let's take a look at Australia on the map. How do I get the map in here? One second. Where's the map? Here is the map. This is Australia. So the major cricket grounds in Australia are in Brisbane, in Sydney, in Melbourne, Adelaide, Hobart in Tasmania, and all the way east in Perth. And there's also one in Darwin, I believe, some Cairns. There's one in Cairns and one in Darwin as well, but those are not really major cricket grounds. The major ones are the Gabba in Brisbane, the SCG in Sydney, the MCG in Melbourne, Adelaide Oval, and the Bellerive Oval in Tasmania, and the Waka or the new ground in Perth, right? Now, why is it so? So let's take a look at a different image. Let's take a look at the population distribution of Australia, shall we? What's the population distribution of Australia like? So this is the population distribution of Australia. The brighter parts are where you have the highest concentrations of population in the country, and that is precisely where you have the major cricket grounds. As you can see in the eastern part, there is the region of Perth, where you have a high concentration of population, and the interior of the country is all empty. It's dry, it's parched, it's inhospitable, and nobody wants to live in that place because it's really hot, really hot. It's the coastal regions that have a nice temperate cool climate. So that's where the major population centers are, and that's where your cricket grounds are located? So it's very simple. The cricket grounds are located where you have the major concentrations of population. And why do you have major concentrations of population there? Because those are the nicest places to live in Australia. Good climate and good access to all the resources, and obviously far away from the dry interior of Australia. So that's the simple reason why it is so. Chinmay says, why are Jupiter and Saturn called gas giants? Are they made of gas? Does it mean if hypothetically a human sets foot on one of these planets, there will be no solid surface to step upon? Good question. So, Jupiter and Saturn are called gas giants because, yes, they are made up of gas. Both of the planets, both of these planets are roughly 90% hydrogen and roughly 10% helium. There's a very small amount of other trace elements and all that, but that's very minor. Most of it is hydrogen and 10% helium. So if you look at Jupiter, for instance, its mass is about 320 times the mass of the Earth. Okay, it's a massive planet, 320 times the mass of the Earth, roughly, approximately, give or take something. And as you go further inside the planet, so it's all gas, so there is no actual surface. If a human being were to hypothetically set foot on the planet, you would just sink all the way all the way down to the core, or until a region where um, your body's density becomes less than the density of the hydrogen. Because as you go deeper into Jupiter, the atmospheric pressure becomes greater and greater. Eventually the gas becomes liquefied and very, very, very hot. So I think the surface of Jupiter is defined as the region where the atmospheric pressure is equal to equal to the atmospheric pressure of the Earth. That is defined arbitrarily as the surface of the planet, but it has no actual solid surface. It has a solid core, most likely. Maybe it's made up of metallic hydrogen, which is a weird form phase of hydrogen, which may be surrounded by molecular hydrogen. Maybe it has a rocky core, maybe it has a carboniferous core. If there is carbon at the core of Jupiter, it will be compressed so much that it will become diamond. So maybe there is a massive amount of diamond at the core of Jupiter, and the same goes for Saturn. In the case of Saturn, the mass of Saturn is roughly 100 times that of Earth, maybe 90 times, 95, something like that. And the internal structure is similar in some ways to Jupiter. In in the case of Jupiter, the core temperature of the planet is about 35,000 degrees Celsius. In the case of Saturn, it's about 10,000 degrees Celsius. So that's the kind of temperature you have. So that is the reason why these two planets are called gas giants. They are giant planets and they are made up of gas, mostly hydrogen, some helium. Right? So that is the reason why. Someone says, can we see planets of other stars? Telescopes. Well, if you have a telescope of your own and if you try to look at a star, you will not see planets. You can't. So, not through your typical amateur or backyard astronomy telescopes, but you can nowadays use a specialized instrument called a coronagraph, and you can attach it to the major telescopes in the major observatories on our planet. Observatories like the Wendelstein Observatory in Germany, or the Hale telescope at the Palomar Observatory in California in the US, or the European Southern Observatory, VLS, Very Large Telescope in Chile, and so on and so forth. These are massive telescopes, and you can attach this instrument called a coronagraph to these telescopes in a technique called direct imaging. And what it does is that it obscures the surface of the star. And if you obscure the star itself, then you can suddenly see what's around the star. In that case, you are actually able to observe planets visually through telescopes using this technique. So let's take a look at some images, if I can find some of coronagraph images of exoplanets. Let's go to Google, our good friend Google. Okay, coronagraph exoplanet images. Let's take a look at this. What does it throw up? So this here could be that. Yeah, in this case, as you can see, the the disk of the star is obscured, and you can see some of these exoplanets around that. This is a GIF image, and if you look here, the arrow, it demonstrates the movement of an exoplanet around a star. So this is a direct image. This technique is called direct imaging, and you can actually see exoplanets. This again here shows an image of an exoplanet and so on. So yes, nowadays it is possible, and as this technology gets better, you may be able to see better and better images of planets through this technique. So yes, in some cases we can actually see exoplanets through the telescope. Okay, Ankit Kumar says the country which has dominance in the Indian Ocean has dominance over the world. What should the Indian Navy and the Indian government do to make this strategic location fall in their favor? How Andaman and Nicobar's military strategy is making India unbeatable. Can you please explain this? Okay, let's go back to the map. Where is the map? Right. Let's take a look at the Andaman Nicobar Islands and the Indian Ocean region. Okay, so this here is India, and south of India is the Indian Ocean region. As you can see, India has this incredibly central geographical position in the Indian Ocean region. It's a God gifted position. It dominates the entire Indian Ocean region. Now, why do people say that the country that dominates the Indian Ocean region will dominate the world? It's because the majority of the world's trade takes place in this region. So there are multiple choke points in this region. The first choke point is Suez, the Suez Canal region. So as you can see, this is the city, the Egyptian city of Suez, Al Suez, and there is this canal, so which connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. So that is a major choke point. The second choke point is the Strait of Bab al Mandeb, which is right here between Djibouti and Yemen, the Gulf of Aden. Then you have the Strait of Hormuz, which connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman. That is another choke point. Then you have certain choke points that people may not be aware of, which pass through the Lakshadweep Islands and the Andaman Islands. And then you have the two major choke points here, which is the Strait of Malacca, this narrow region, and the Sunda Strait over here. Is it called the Sunda Strait? It's called something else. Whatever it is, it's a narrow choke point over here. And all of these choke points are easily accessible to India. So if India has a powerful navy and a powerful air force, India can close off, shut down these choke points at will. And that's why India has such a huge opportunity to become a major geopolitical player. I'm not saying India should blackmail the world or anything. India should be a responsible geopolitical power, and India always has been that. But it is something that India can use to make China behave. If China indulges in any misadventure in the Tibet India border, then India can make China behave by its actions in the Indian Ocean region, because the majority of China's imports and exports go through all of these choke points, and India can, with its navy and its air force, control this. So that is why it is said that the country that dominates the Indian Ocean region will certainly dominate the world. And what should the Indian Navy and Indian government do about this? India needs to invest in a better navy, in a more massive navy. We need a lot more ships. We need a lot more submarines. India needs to stop investing in aircraft carriers, which are nice to see. We don't need that. We need submarines. Aircraft carriers were the capital ship of the 20th century. The submarine is the capital ship of the 21st century. It's virtually indetectable. It is invisible. These are stealthy, deadly, silent killers. That's what India needs to invest in: conventional submarines and nuclear submarines. And India should invest in a coast guard which is more powerful. You can call it the navy or whatever. And we already have these unsinkable aircraft carriers, the Andaman Islands, the Nicobar Islands, and the Lakshadweep Islands. So we don't really need to invest in these massive ships that cost billions of dollars. We should invest in submarines and lots of submarines because quantity has a quality of its own. So these are the things that India needs to do. The second question is that how Andaman and Nicobar's military strategy is making India unbeatable. So these days, I'm getting this question over the past couple of weeks that apparently India has this unbeatable strategy in the Andaman Nicobar Islands, and India is killing China or whatever. I don't know where this comes from, but wherever you're getting these ideas from, it is not consistent with reality. Which strategy in the Andaman Islands is making India unbeatable? What India should do in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands is to militarize them. India should create multiple airstrips, air force bases. India should invest in multiple ports in these regions, in these islands, in submarine bases, in naval bases. India should create A2AD bubbles, anti-access area denial bubbles, by installing batteries of cruise missiles, anti-aircraft missiles, all that. If India does that, then it will make India virtually unbeatable. India is not doing that. So I don't know what strategy people are talking about these. I don't know where these ideas come from. That there is some strategy that is making India unbeatable in the Andaman Islands. India is virtually doing nothing. There is, I think, one or two airstrips or air force stations, maybe one, maybe two at most, in this region. I think it's known to everyone, Campbell Bay. So that's what it is, and beyond that there is very little. There may be 5 or 6 or maybe 10 Sukhoi fighters sitting there at any given point in time, if we are lucky. Maybe one or two Poseidon anti-submarine warfare airplanes, and maybe a couple of Indian Navy ships, and that's all. There are no submarine bases there. There's not much of development that's happened there. So there is no strategy that, as such. So any claim that anyone is making that there is some incredibly unbeatable strategy in this region that India is using to beat China or defeat China or kill China, that is wishful thinking. It is not consistent with reality. I see India is in a good position vis-a-vis China. If China were to start a war with India, we can deal with it properly. We can defeat them. We can defeat them in a defensive war, and we can make them suffer significant losses. But India is not in a position to start a war against China. So we are still, if we compare the two militaries and economies, we are still significantly inferior to the Chinese. But we have certain advantages that the Chinese don't have, and they will not mess with us because of those reasons. But there is nothing happening in the Andaman Nicobar Islands that can be considered to be an unbeatable or whatever strategy. So that is certainly not the case. Right. Next question. Sujata says, Namaskar. My question is, when the US can keep an eye on Indian nuclear tests with their satellites, why can't we keep an eye on terrorist factories present in Pakistan with our satellites and expose them to the world and pressurize Pakistan to give permission to India, to the Indian army, to eliminate terrorists? Okay. The Americans have maybe hundreds of military satellites or spy satellites, right? In orbit. These are deployed all around the world. India also has a number of satellites that are classified as remote sensing satellites, etc., which essentially are satellites with specialized instruments which view the earth, which look at the earth, the surface of the earth, in a variety of frequencies and wavelengths. These satellites have very good resolutions, maybe a meter, maybe a foot, maybe a centimeter. Yeah. And they may, because of various wavelengths and all, they may be able to peer through clouds. They may be even able to see what's happening on the ground in darkness at night, possibly. Right? We don't quite know what all is going on there, but India has a number of satellites. What the exact number is, let's not go into that. And these satellites keep an eye on India's surroundings, whether it is to the west in Pakistan, whether it is in Pakistan occupied Kashmir or wherever else, whether it is in Tibet, whether it's in the Indian Ocean region, wherever. We have the assets in place to keep an eye on everything that's happening. So we are certainly keeping an eye on the terrorist factories present in Pakistan with our satellites. These satellites, you can call them remote sensing satellites or military satellites or spy satellites, same thing. Now, let's say we are seeing what's happening in Pakistan, terrorist factories. What is the point of exposing it to the world? Yeah, here we go. We have the proof. What's the point? The world knows what Pakistan is doing. The world has known for decades what Pakistan is doing. How many times will we expose them to the world? It makes no difference. The world doesn't care. The world doesn't care. They know what Pakistan has been doing. They know that the Pakistanis have been bleeding India since the 1980s in Kashmir and other places. The question is, real question is, who was funding all that? Who was funding Pakistani terrorism in India? Who was financing Pakistani terrorism in India? That is the real question. And because it is the US that was doing it, that's why the world will always turn a blind eye to Pakistani activities. So exposing the Pakistanis is going to solve no problem whatsoever. They will just ignore it. The Western media will never run such a story. They know what's happening. Now, about pressurizing Pakistan so that they will give permission to the Indian army to eliminate terrorists. The Indian army needs permission not from Pakistan, but from the Prime Minister of India. That is the only permission the Indian army needs. When the Indian army gets a go ahead from the Prime Minister of India, they don't go and knock on Pakistan's door. Do you remember Balakot? Do you remember the surgical strikes? Did the Indian army go and knock and take permission? No. So when the time is right, the right things will be done. We don't need anybody's permission. We know what the Pakistani army is up to. We know where the terrorist factories are. Everything is known. When the time is right, the right action will be taken. There's no question of taking permission or exposing anyone. There's no need to expose anything. There's no need to take any permission. All that needs to be done is to act when when the moment is opportune. When will the time be right? That is for the Indian government to calculate based on the global geopolitical scenario. Aman Singh says, what should be the most prominent personality traits of a renowned military leader? Look, personality doesn't matter. There have been military leaders who have been extremely cheerful and boisterous and social. There have been military leaders who have been very reserved, introverted, aloof. So the personality doesn't matter. But what is the most important characteristic or trait of a military leader? The most important characteristic of a military leader is that they should succeed. That's all. Succeed. And when I say a military leader should succeed, I don't mean that they should win every single battle. No, 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 no. You can fail in the short term. Take the great Mongol conqueror Shri Chinggis Khan, for instance, as an example. His main characteristic is that he did not lose a single military campaign after he became the great Khan of the Mongols. He won every single military campaign. But his army lost a few battles here and there in those military campaigns. A military campaign is like a World Cup. A World Cup. When your cricket team or your football team goes to the World Cup, they're going to play a number of matches, a number of games. It doesn't matter if you lose one or two games here and there. What matters is that you win the final match. You reach there. You have to first qualify for the quarterfinals. You make sure you do that. Then you qualify to the semifinals, then the final, and then you win the final. Before that, in the group phase, it's okay to lose one or two games as long as you can qualify for the next round. So a military campaign is like a World Cup. It is okay to lose one or two small battles here and there. You can make a couple of chess sacrifices if you want, but overall you have to win the World Cup. So a military campaign is like a World Cup. The great Shri Chinggis Khan, the great, the kind, the benevolent, the wise leader Chinggis Khan, he did not ever lose a single military campaign. So the most important characteristic of a military leader is they should win. They should succeed. That's what matters. So that is what I can offer to you in brief. Okay, Samiksha Goyal says, I think ethics are very important and we will never be able to condemn Pakistan for terrorism if we ourselves join hands with a terrorist organization. Supporting the Taliban means you are going against humanity. Narak mein jagah mein pakki milegi. Hmm. You know, I don't remember who it was that said this. I think it was the great Rajendra Chola, I think, who said this. He said that if you are a king and you do everything and you do whatever it takes to ensure the long term prosperity and success of your empire, then you can never go to heaven. You will go to hell because you will have to do things that other people will see as morally unjust or morally or immoral. As a ruler, the highest morality for a ruler, the great Vishnugupta Chanakya said this, the highest morality for a ruler is to ensure the long term security and prosperity of the country, of the nation, of the kingdom, and its people. That's all. And you have to do whatever it takes to ensure this. You may have to indulge in assassinations of political leaders. You may have to wage wars with foreign countries. You may have to join hands with foreign terrorist organizations to destroy your enemies. You have to do whatever it takes to ensure the long term security and prosperity of your country, of your nation, of your kingdom, and its people. Your duty is to your people and your people only, not to everybody else. You may have to be immoral for that. You may have to be unethical for that. And you may have to go to hell after you die for that. But that is a sacrifice you should be willing to make. And if you cannot do this, you are not worthy of being a king. That's how it goes. Ethics and morality are fine for the common man and woman. For a king, it's a different ballgame altogether. So these wonderful words, they're nice in books and all that, but the real world is a real world, right? So that's how it goes. That's how the game is always played. And whether you agree with it or not, well, who are we to criticize what Vishnu Gupta Chanakya said? He is the man, and he's right. Okay, this is the next question. Okay, this is by Titraklitos. I can read the Greek alphabet because in physics we have Greek symbols. Right. So Titraklitos says, Namaskaram, there is a theory that says that ancient Indians, probably Sanskrit or Tamil, probably whatever, uh, explorers of the so-called Indianized kingdoms of the Malay archipelago and other Southeast Asian islands reached the Pacific coast of South America by crossing the Pacific Ocean and are considered as the ancestors of the Olmecs. What are your views about this? Let's go to the map once again. Where's the map? Here's the map. I'm the map. I'm the map. Okay. This is the map. So the theory, like Tetraklitos says, is that ancient Indians, according to this theory or whatever hypothesis, may have crossed the Pacific Ocean and reached Southern America, South America. What is it said here? Reached the Pacific coast of South America by crossing the Pacific Ocean and maybe the ancestors of the Olmecs. Okay, so as you can see, the Pacific Ocean is vast. It's vast. It's a big, huge, massive expanse of water. We do know that about 5,000 years before today, ancient Indians did make it to Australia, right? And the only way to reach Australia is by sea. So Indians could do that. They had the ability to cross the ocean, reach Australia. Maybe they did it from Indonesia, maybe from Kalinga, maybe from southern India, but they had to cross the ocean to go to Australia. We know it because there is unmistakable genetic evidence of Indian genetics in the Australian aboriginal populations, and this introgression happens around 5,000 years before today, when the Saraswati Sindhu phase of our civilization was at its peak. So If the Indians could do that 5,000 years ago, it is certainly possible. It is certainly within the realm of possibility that some Indians may have crossed the Pacific Ocean and reached the Pacific coast of South America. It is possible. Now, the Olmec civilization, let's go back to the map, sorry. The Olmec civilization was found in eastern Mexico, on the eastern coast, on the Atlantic coast of Mexico, which is not quite far from the western coast, from the Pacific coast. And some artifacts of the Olmecs were also found on the western coast of Mexico as well. And the Olmec civilization dates back to about 3,000 years before today, right? And if you look at the artifacts, the massive stone carvings, etc., that the Olmecs left behind, they let's see what that looks like, shall we? Let me go back to Google. Once again, let me share that. Olmec carvings. Olmec carvings or Olmec statues or whatever. So these are the colossal heads that the Olmecs left behind. And if you look at the facial features of all of these people that are depicted in these massive stone carvings, they look like people who are of African origin. I mean, that's the kind of facial features that you see mostly. As you can see, these facial features don't resemble Indians. These facial features resemble people of African origin or ethnicity. I mean, that's the stereotypical look that you find in Africa, among certain African peoples, right? Not in India. Not the average Indian person doesn't look like this, right? So, from the circumstantial evidence that we have over here, it would appear that if somebody crossed an ocean and reached this region, it may have been people from Africa. Now, we don't have, as far as I know, a skeletal evidence from the Olmec civilization. If we can find that, then we could maybe do some DNA testing and figure out what sort of haplogroups, etc., are present among the population. So, as of today, we don't have sufficient data points and sufficient evidence to either prove or disprove a theory of Indian origin. But from the circumstantial evidence that we have, it looks like it's not Indian. It looks like it's probably some African origin ethnic group, possibly. So my views are that we still don't have sufficient data, therefore we cannot really come to any conclusions. But from whatever little evidence we have, it looks like it may be from Africa, not from India. But time will tell. Okay, Mark Douglas says, if Chavda is right and the West is just an American hegemony, responsible for all the bad in the world, I know the okay, whatever, responsible for whatever, ask yourself, why does all mass migration always happen from the East to the West? I am not seeing millions of displaced Syrians fleeing to Russia. They all come to the EU. I am not seeing millions of displaced Europeans fleeing to India either. The flow of people is definitely from India, not to India. And therefore, Chavda is wrong. Brilliant, impeccable logic by Mark Douglas. See, so what I have said is this, that the term superpower is a euphemism for empire. The United States exhibits all the classical characteristics of an empire, of an imperial power. And you know what the characteristics are from the study of human history, 10,000 years of human history, going back to the Persians, to the Akkadians, to the Romans, to the various Indian empires, to the Chinese, Mongols, and so on and so forth. Right? There are certain characteristics that an empire has, and the US has that. The US is essentially a continuation of the British Empire, the Anglo-Saxon Empire. I'm not saying the US is responsible for everything that's bad in the world. They have maintained a certain kind of order, which is predicated on their hegemony and their writ, but that's just how it is. I'm not saying the US is responsible for everything that's bad in the world. Some people try to misconstrue that in that form. It's not quite the case. But, and the point the Mark Douglas is making is that all mass migration always happens from the east to the west, and therefore I must be wrong that the US is an empire. really. When we are talking about mass migrations, about people migrating from point A to point B in search of a better life, they don't care whether they're going to an empire or not. All that matters is that they will have a better life, better living standards. If you look at India, in 1947, India had a life expectancy of 28 years or 30 years. India's GDP per capita was in the pits. Everything of value had been stolen, plundered from India by the British. The West had been enriched at the expense of India. India was a hellhole. That's what the British made of India. And therefore, Indians were desperate to escape this hellhole, especially after the regimes that ensued after 1947. The British puppet regimes. I mean, not quite British puppet regimes, but various prime ministers, etc., who did not do anything to ameliorate the Indian economy and make lives better for India, for the people of India for decades. And therefore, Indians wanted to immigrate out of India. And if you look at the West, the per capita GDP in the West is like at that time was more than 50 times that of India. Massively better living standards. And so who cares if it's an empire or whatever? You can get a better life there by moving there and becoming a citizen there. So that's what everybody wanted. Even today, let's go back 2000 years. The Roman Empire was a hegemonic power, cruel power. They indulge in massive genocides all across Europe. See what they did to the Helvetian peoples. See what they did to the Celtic peoples. See read about the military campaigns of Julius Caesar. See what they did in Carthage. Wide scale genocide. And yet all roads led to Rome. Everybody wanted to go and live in Rome because you had the highest and best living standards there. As long as you became a citizen of the Roman Empire, you were treated well. So that's how it goes. So this argument is not quite uh, grounded in logic, I'm afraid to say. Right. Ramalakshmi says, you have said that the decline in US imperialism over the world and their influence is dropping. My question is, if such a superpower is in decline, in what way does it get affected decades later? Is it in standards of living or economy or military or only the influence over the nations? What sectors would be affected, if any? When any power goes into decline, everything declines. The economy declines, the rule of law internally in the country declines, its influence globally declines, its geopolitical influence declines, its military reach declines, its industries crumble. You can see that over and over again in history. If you look at the Western Roman Empire, how they declined, they were the greatest power in the world, at least in Europe, in the Western Hemisphere, for quite a long time. And then what happened? Italy went into like the Dark Ages, right? What happened to the Byzantine Empire? They also were a massive empire, and then they slowly shrank, and then eventually it was just like a city state around Constantinople. The same thing you can see in various other empires. It's a gradual process that takes centuries, sometimes, usually decades, 30, 40, 50 years. It's a slow process of decline and decay. I don't wish that on anybody, but it's a cyclic process. The history of the world shows that empires rise and fall, rise and fall, rise and fall in cycles. Okay, so if a superpower or an empire is in decline, there is all sectors are affected. Sometimes you may have a civil war. If you look at the dynastic cycles in China, which are imperial cycles, usually when an empire or a dynasty crumbles, there's a period of extended civil war. That's what Chinese history shows us again and again and again. So that is from the example of China. In other places like Rome, etc., you also had episodic events like civil wars and strife and all that. Industries would go for a toss and so on. So it's never an orderly process. It's often very messy, and that typically when you have an empire at a global scale, it goes into decline. It's going to create a lot of chaos and a lot of instability in the world, and that is never good for anybody. So one hopes that things go well, and but let's see how it goes. We cannot stop the tides of history, and things will proceed in a certain way. Okay, Palak Chudasama says, my 11-year-old daughter Nitya has been asking this question for weeks now. How do blind people dream, or can they dream? And my 7-year-old son Mrig asked a strange question: what is the life cycle of air? Kids ask the most interesting questions. Kids still have an active imagination and a curiosity and thirst for knowledge. And after they spend a few years in the education system, all of that is smashed out of their heads. So I'm glad that kids are asking such interesting questions. So let me take the second question first, which is asked by Mrig. What is the life cycle of air? See, air is a gas. The air that we breathe, that we live in, is part of the atmosphere of the earth, right? Uh, the atmosphere of the earth is technically, or it is by convention, uh, said to extend 100 kilometers above the earth's surface, and beyond that you have space. So that's just the convention. So the air we are breathing is part of the atmosphere of the earth. It is a gas, about 70%, I believe, nitrogen, 28% or so oxygen, the rest is carbon dioxide, and so on and so forth, right? So it is simply gas molecules. It is not a living creature, or a living being. It's not made of living organisms. And since it is not a living thing, it doesn't have a life cycle, right? So if you look at the history of the earth over the past 3.5, 4 billion years, or whatever, however long it has been since the earth formed in the primordial solar system, the atmosphere of the earth has undergone major changes and significant compositional changes. So that happens over millions, hundreds of millions, and billions of years. In the beginning, the earth's atmosphere was very, very different. uh, Much of it was, what was it, I don't quite remember what was the composition, but there was very little oxygen. And there was a and then what happened was, there was these bacteria that were living in the oceans, and they gave off a lot of oxygen, which caused a mass extinction event. That is the great oxygenation catastrophe, they call it. That happened about 3-4 billion years ago. You can look it up, how, when it happened. And then oxygen became one of the major components of the atmosphere, and it is something that is indispensable for us. Without it, we will die. So it's something that has changed a lot over time, but it doesn't actually have a life cycle because it is not a living thing, right? The other question is, how do blind people dream, or can they dream? Yes, of course they will dream. Now it depends. Most people who are blind are people who became blind because of some illness or some accident or something, which means that in the past they could see. The they once had sight or vision, and then they lost it. So for such people, they still have the memory of seeing things. And such people, even though they cannot see with their eyes, when they sleep they would still dream things that they can see. But a small percentage of people who are blind are born blind, and they have never seen anything in their life. For such people, I would imagine that the dreams would be through the other senses, auditory senses or whatever. So they may dream things without the experience of any kind of vision. So that's a very interesting question. So most blind people who dream would still have visions in their dreams, even though their eyes don't function. But a small percentage who are born blind would dream in the form of sounds and other experiences. That's how it would typically be. Okay, let's take one or two more questions. Lakshya says, I, as a 16-year-old, my parents keep asking me what career and degree I want to pursue. They're also asking me which university I want to join here in Australia. I absolutely hate the prison that is school. As I walk to school, I'm cursing under my breath. I want to be an entrepreneur. How do I find a business mentor and learn skills? I'm mainly looking for guidance. Please help. Okay, you're 16 years old, you want to be an entrepreneur, you hate school. I get it. School is a pain, and you forced to study stuff that doesn't really have any real relevance in the real world, and so on. Yeah, but so you're still very young, you have a long way to go. I would offer a word of caution. Firstly, entrepreneurship looks like a very glamorous thing. You make money, you live the fast life, and you succeed and all that. But the truth is that very few entrepreneurs actually succeed. It's a long process of many years, it's a long grind. The success stories you see are never overnight success. There's a whole period of grind that lies behind that. All overnight success takes 5, 10, 15 years. Right? And most entrepreneurs and most businesses fail, or there are multiple failures before you have a success. And that's how it is. So and the life of an entrepreneur is often very, very harsh, very painful, very brutal, very agonizing. And that's what is never shown in the media and movies and all that. So that is something you have to keep in mind. Secondly, you may want to be an entrepreneur, but do you have the skills, the aptitude for that? Of course, you can develop skills for sure. So how do you do that? So I would say that, you know what, you should still go to school, you should still go to college, you should get your degree as a backup plan. And in the meanwhile, what you can do is you can attend business conferences or whatever in your free time, meet other entrepreneurs who are doing stuff, try something on your own with some small amount of money. Yeah, read as many business books as you can. It's not easy, you have to put in the hard work. Give yourself 2 years and try to read 100 business books. Go to Amazon, go into the category of books for business, look at all the 5-star reviews or 4-star plus reviews, take the top 100 books and try to read all of these 100 books in the next 2 years. Go to business conferences, go and mingle with entrepreneurs and try to gain some kind of wisdom from them. Talk to them, ask them about what they do, how, what was the journey like, what is the process like, right? And that's how you make connections. And if you're lucky, you may even find a mentor or two. And so that's the process you have to go through. It's a long process. You're still 16, you have a long way to go. I certainly wish you all the best, but I would uh, offer a word of caution that you should still go through school, go through college, get whatever degree you need to get whatever is best for you based on your personal aptitude and strengths. And always have a backup plan. Don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Don't put all of your money on just one horse. Always have plan B, plan C. So that's what I can say. All the best, sir. Okay, one last question. Ashwathama says, what is the difference between reading a book or listening to an audio book? Which do you prefer? I prefer to read physical books. I read really fast. My reading speed is very, very high. Uh, it's something I've developed over the years and decades. I read a lot. So I prefer reading, because when someone talks this, they talk at a certain speed. My mind, it kind of, it's frustrating. I read so much faster than somebody can speak. I kind of speak also fast because of that, perhaps. So I prefer reading books. But there is a certain value that audiobooks have, even for me. So for instance, if you go for a run, let's say you want to go for a run in the morning, half an hour, 1 hour, whatever, run for an hour. When you're running, as long as it's not in traffic, if it's on a treadmill or whatever, you can listen to an audiobook at the same time. So that is a good experience. That's a nice experience. You're running, you it's exhilarating, and you're also listening to an audiobook. So that is a good way of listening to an audiobook. Also, if you're in the gym exercising, working out, you can put an audiobook on in the background. So, or if you're cooking, I enjoy cooking at times. So if you're cooking and you have this time you're spending in the kitchen, you can keep an audiobook or a podcast or something on, and keep it going in the background. So that helps. So that's how I use audiobooks, but typically I prefer to read physical books. All right, let's take a few questions from the live chat. If you all have more questions you want to ask me, now is your time to shine, my friends. Go for it. Is learning math a skill? Yes, learning math is a skill. There, to anything, there are two components: fortuna and virtu. So not like that, but if you have the aptitude, of doing something. Let's say you are a gifted runner, right? Or you're a gifted swimmer. So you have the ability to swim well or to run well. But if you don't practice, if you don't put in the hard yards, if you don't spend the hours perfecting your craft, then even though you are talented, you will not reach your full potential. Similarly, if you have the aptitude for math, but you don't practice, if you don't put in the hours and hours and hours, you will not become good at it. So, yes, learning math is a skill. And more than talent, hard work is what matters in anything. So, yes, learning math is a skill. Um, Kattapa ne bahubali ko kyun mara? Yeah, I don't remember kyun mara, but it was an interesting story. Um, what's the history of sati pratha? Please watch the conversation I had with Dr. Meenakshi Jain on this channel, in which we go into detail about the history of Sati Pratha and the myths and fabrications that have been constructed around this so-called supposed practice. Please watch my interaction with Dr. Meenakshi Jain on this channel, and you will get everything you would like to know about this particular matter. Um. Okay, what else do we have? My views on Tashkent files, any relation between the former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and the KGB? These are two different questions. If you want to talk about the Tashkent files, the Lal Bahadur Shastri case, etc., please watch my interaction with Anuj Dhar on this channel, podcast number 1. I think it was in January this year on this channel. So if you want to know about that, go and watch that podcast. You will get to know whatever you need. Okay, where else are we? What are the possibilities of indo-pacific dominance of India in the next 10 years? Zero. We need to dominate the Indian Ocean, not the Indo-Pacific. Pacific is too far. That will come in the future, if it does. What's your view on the Bharat series book by J. Sai Deepak? I haven't read it, sorry. Maybe I will someday and then I'll talk about it. Does India have too much democracy, like the Chinese say? Yes, India has too much democracy. Too much democracy. What is this? Too much democracy. Right. Where are we? I found something and it disappeared. Okay. Was Sri Lanka part of ancient India as Gandhara? Sri Lanka was definitely part of Indian civilization. The Sri Lankan people, their ethnicity is Indian. Let's say you are in London, England, and you see a person walking down the street who is of Sri Lankan origin. What is the first thing that comes to your mind? This person is Indian, right? So the Sri Lankan ethnicity is the Indian ethnicity. We have the same genetics, same DNA, same origins, everything. And culturally also, the Sinhalese and the Tamils are Indians. Their culture is Indian. So yes, it was just as much part of India, civilizationally, as Gandhar. See, today we think about nations, nation states. That is a very new concept. The nation state concept is a very new concept. It's been around for a fraction of an instant in the context, big picture of human history. Historically, we had civilizations, nations, and empires. India was always a civilization. India is a civilization state, and Gandhar used to be part of Indian civilization. And Sri Lanka, you can say, is still part of the civilizational fabric of India, even though it's not part of the nation state of India. So, yeah, that's what it is. What qualities should I develop to become an IFS officer? IFS means Indian Foreign Service. You want to become a diplomat. To be a diplomat, you should be very much in touch with current affairs. You need to understand the history of the world very well, especially the history of the last 100 years, starting from the 20th century onwards. So, the turn of the century, whatever happened, the First World War, the Second World War, the Cold War, You need to understand the cause and effect sequence, the cause and effect chain, the causality chain, the dynamics. You need to understand geopolitics, you need to understand economics. um, it would help if you learn multiple languages also, at least one foreign language. We all speak this foreign language called English, but one additional foreign language, things like that. I don't know what exam you have to pass. I think it's the same exam, and then they select people for the IFS, IPS, IFS, etc., whatever. So I am not quite sure what the mechanics and dynamics of the selection procedure are, but from my perspective, if you want to be a diplomat, you should know all of this, and eventually you'll be assigned to some nation, perhaps, and you would want to learn or study more about the nation, its history, and its uh, political structure and all that. Yeah. So that is what you need to do to be a good IFS officer, a good diplomat. All right, let's see one or two more questions. Um, what's your view on dark matter with reference to Veritas Serum video? I have not watched the said video, so I don't know. Dark matter, as we know, is one of the major unknown components of the universe. The universe is about 70% dark energy, about 25, roughly 69-70% dark energy, roughly 25% 24-25% dark matter, and roughly 5% or so visible matter. What is dark matter? That's what we are trying to figure out. What is dark energy? We don't have the least idea, but at least dark matter, we have some clues. It's something that interacts only gravitationally. The weak interaction seems to, well, there's no evidence for it, so mostly most likely it's only gravitationally interacting. Maybe it is super heavy dark matter, SHDM, cold dark matter. And there are a number of candidates that have been proposed, and so on. So this video that you are referring to, unfortunately I have not seen it, but this is what I can say in very brief about dark matter. Right. Let's take maybe one question. Let us see. Let us see. Why did ancient Southeast Asians adopt Indian culture rather than Chinese culture? Because Indian culture was way more influential. In India, as a civilization, was way more influential and far-reaching than the Chinese civilization and culture. Indians were enterprising. India was a major maritime culture and civilization. Indians went everywhere by boat and by ship, mainly by ship. That's how Indians reached all over Southeast Asia. And Indian culture was not supremacist, exclusivist, and predatory. It actually contributed something valuable and positive to Southeast Asia. It was never imposed upon these people by force. And that's why they were so impressed by Indian culture that they adopted it for themselves. And today you have various local examples, local manifestations of Indian culture all across Southeast Asia. And that is now their native culture. So it's because of India's enormously influential nature that this happened. The Chinese statesman and diplomat Hu Shi said that ancient India conquered China without ever sending a single soldier across the Himalayas. We conquered China culturally. And the Chinese greedily lapped up Indian culture and absorbed it deep into their civilization. Today, they claim that Buddhism is a Chinese thing. Well, for all intents and purposes, Buddhism, you could say, is something that has Chinese characteristics today. So they are trying to claim Indian culture and civilization for their own. Well, that's how it is. All right, let's. Shall we take one more question, or are we done? I can see lots of questions here, but um, okay. Last question is: has India crossed the LAC as claimed by the Chinese foreign minister that they have found Indian weapons? I think this claim was made during the Galwan clashes, and the media or the social media is trying to regurgitate this today. It is something from 2020. It's a claim they had made in 2020 after the Galwan clash in order to justify their misadventure. So that old news report for 2020 is now being republicized today in 2021, and now everyone thinks that this is what they've claimed today. No, it's an old claim. Anyhow, that we don't quite recognize the LSE, or we do recognize it to some extent, but like they say in diplomatic parlance, that both sides have differing perceptions of the line of actual control. So there is no accepted boundary. It's some rough thing that nobody quite agrees upon. And therefore, these claims are made from time to time. We don't have to take them very seriously. All right, ladies, gentlemen, thank you very much for the questions. Very interesting session as always. The questions are always very interesting. So please keep it coming. Next week, let's do two sessions. How about that? Right? So until then, thank you very much for your questions. Thank you for your viewership, and I will see you next week. Thank you. Take care.